you ever had to take away a screen or say no to your kid, and then you watch them melt down in tears, then you know how tough that moment is. It feels like you're the bad guy, even when you're just trying to teach your kid a lesson because you want them to be functional adults. In this video, I want to share 3 simple shifts that changed how I handle discipline, how I view discipline, and how those changes actually got my kid to start helping out without being asked. All right, so let me paint you a picture to kind of understand what I'm talking about. So the other day, Tanner and I were in the house. I was asking him repeatedly not to do something, and he just wasn't listening. He was, being defiant. He's 6 years old. He's at that age where, he's testing the waters, whatever. And obviously, me, as the best parent in the world, obviously, aggravated. And, after a little bit of time of constantly telling them, like, hey, this is what you need to do. I need you to do this. I need you to do that. And him not listening. And so I grounded him. Stevie, tablet, gaming computer. This was Tanner's first grounding. I mean, Tanner's honestly always been a pretty good kid overall, but this time he was not calm. He lost his shit. And I started thinking did I go too hard? Because again, I think as parents, we forget what it was like being a kid. We forget how we were when we were our children's age. Listen, I'm 40 years old, and sometimes I have a hard time keeping my emotions in check. And it made me think back to my own father. You see, my dad, he's a great dad, by the way, but it was hard back then because my dad was very much black and white. He was very much if I say this and you don't do it, it's done. There's no second options. There's not it's my way or the highway, type mentality or whatever. Me, on the other hand, I went back to Tanner and I thought this is a kid that is a great kid most of the time, 99% of the time, does what he's told, helps out tremendously, is always willing to help out, shares things with others. Just a really good kid. Our kids are the number one person in the world that wants to have a good, healthy relationship with us. Think about that. I don't know any child that does not want to have a great relationship with their parent. And then that's when I remembered the 3 things that always work better than punishment when it comes to dealing with my children. And so the first one is being okay with admitting that you're wrong and that you don't always get it right, and then working on your ability to pause and think. And, when I catch myself getting frustrated, and again, I don't always catch it right away. Sometimes I get aggravated. Sometimes I get upset. Sometimes I might prematurely, ground Tanner or something. I turned it into kind of like a teaching moment. Hey, not even dad's perfect. I'm not going to pretend to try to be perfect. I don't need to be your superhero in the fact that I'm always right, never wrong. I need to be your superhero in life of it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to go to people and tell them you messed up. It's okay to expect forgiveness from the people that you love when you do make mistakes. I try to, what I think helps me too when I kind of get in that, when I go into that pause and think method, is I try to think, why is he doing this that is not a malicious intention? So it forces me to think of what could just be a normal reason because he's a kid that, because he's young, undeveloped brain, blah, blah, blah. What's just the normal reason that he might not be wanting to do this? I'll explain to him, yeah, I grounded you. And then an hour later, I ungrounded you after we talked. And this is why. And it was because, you seemed remorseful or you seemed like you understood why I was getting frustrated and seemed upset. And again, my dad, he was kind of always that black and white character. And I think what it taught me was you have to be willing to change your mind when you're presented with new information. And you have to be willing to do that and not be afraid of being wrong, of looking like you're being wrong. I think we're all so worried about our pride in a sense. We don't want to let our kids see that we messed up. We want them to be proud of us. We want them to, think highly of us. The second one is the family team approach. My go-to phrase with Tanner is we're family. We're supposed to help each other out. If nobody else in this world is going to help me out, I should be able to expect that family will help me out. Family is everything. At the end of the day, it's me and you, bud. It's me and you. We got to get everything in this house done. This house has to be clean, has to stay picked up, or else we live in a jungle. We live in a mess. It's a disaster. Because sometimes, again, I don't think we take the time to explain to our kids, I get it, you know, I don't want to do it either. Again, you explain to him like, hey, I'm the same way. And I'm honest about that. I tell him all the time how much I hate doing laundry because I want him to understand you don't have to like something to do it. And but in a teaching way. Again, it's how we present it to our children. And so that brings me to the third point, which is meaningful celebrations. That is positive reinforcement. That is treating your kid like the dog they are. No, just positive reinforcement works so much better than negative reinforcement. You have to be willing to also notice and take time to celebrate the good things, the good behaviors. And that doesn't always have to be monetarily. That doesn't always have to be getting them a treat. Like, sometimes I'll take Tanner to get ice cream because he helped me for the day or something. Um, you know, but again, you don't have to spend money. It could be something just as simple as like, hey, if you do this, we'll jump in the swimming pool. We'll go for a swim. Hey, if you do this, we'll run down to the lake and go for a hike. I mean, whatever it is that your kid likes, like, hey, you do this, I'll go jump on the trampoline with you for, a half an hour. And so, it's not random rewards either. It's specifically like I'm telling him each and every time, this is why this good thing is happening to you. And listen, I know what a lot of you are thinking. Like, okay, I'm going to reward my kid for all this stuff. I'm never going to yell at him. I'm going to try to sit down and explain it to him, blah, blah, blah. And the moment you start talking about this stuff, there's always the two camps. There's always the side that, you know, of course agrees. And then, there's the other side, which thinks you're being too soft. But let me just share some kind of, results. Because what I've noticed is like, over time, again, Tanner is 6 and we constantly get mentions of how, well behaved Tanner is as a child and overall. I mean, again, obviously kid, he has his issues. But overall, he's respectful to adults. He again does what he's told to do most of the time. 98% of the time. He can at times explain that he's upset without losing his temper. Like he's learned to do that over the last couple years. He doesn't get mad and throw things or break things like I've seen other kids do, where they'll take, their control, my nieces or nephews, and they'll throw a controller or something, or they'll throw a toy because they get mad arguing. He doesn't really do that. But what I think or what I've noticed is when me and my ex in court, my ex has testified that when he's at her house, he's disrespectful. He yells at her, screams, doesn't listen, will throw chairs. However, when I got up to testify, I told the judge, like, I have no idea what she's talking about because at my house, he doesn't do any of that. He's respectful. He's respectful to any and all adults who are around. He helps clean. Like I said, he's more than willing to get up on his own and come help me and clean. It's the same exact kid, but two completely different results. And I'm not saying that I'm a better parent or anything like that, to be perfectly clear. I still have boundaries. Like, to be clear, everybody, like, when you start talking like this, I feel like a lot of people think you're like saying, like, don't discipline your kids. Don't, and like, oh, now your kids are going to grow up spoiled or not listening or whatever. And again, I'm not saying that. Like, to be clear, I have strict boundaries. So when discipline is needed, here's my approach towards that. I explain the why at his level. Unfortunately, taking the time to sit down and explain the why at your kid's level takes time. And a lot of times we're busy as adults. We're in a hurry and we got a bazillion things we got to do. We got to do the laundry. We got to make dinner still. We got to wash the dishes. We got to mow the lawn, whatever the case may be. And it's like our kids over here like, well, why? And we're like, I don't have time because I said so. It's okay for him to know that I'm angry. I make sure he understands you're not being grounded because I'm angry. I am angry, but you're being grounded because you're not doing this thing I'm asking you to do. Because I think kids are naturally curious to begin with. I think most of us could agree with that. And I think that they're just trying to figure out the world. They don't know what happens if they tell you no until they do it the first time. If you can get down and explain it to their level and explain the importance, almost 9 times out of 10, that alone will get Tanner's mind to just like click. And then, the situation's over, whatever it was. For example, with the electronics breakdown, I grounded him when he refused to help. An hour later, we talked. He showed thoughtfulness, understanding. I explained to him why I was upset. I explained to him why I was grounding him and how I needed his help and how we're family. Even though these are things that are not new things, I've explained them several times, but kids also need reminding. To me, it's like, he didn't have to ask to be ungrounded. I chose to change my mind because he showed thoughtfulness and understanding. Because at the end of the day, once I talked to him, I realized the lesson was learned. So why continue the punishment? And so again, I think, my philosophy when it comes to discipline is I'm not afraid to change my mind when there is new evidence. And again, my dad, he never really admitted being wrong. With us kids, growing up, it was always our fault a lot of times. And I think that it also teaches Tanner, you know, more importantly, forget any of that. I think the big reason outside of like, it doesn't bother me to change my mind. I think it's okay. I'm not afraid, if there's new evidence. The biggest thing I think is that it teaches Tanner that growth matters more than being right or doing everything correct. And so if you want to try out this approach, here is exactly where to start. Maybe you're someone that's constantly feel like you're yelling at your kid and they're never listening and you're struggling here and doing, whatever. No judgment on my end. We've all been there as parents. Tonight. Oh, that's right. Homework. Do some kind of an activity that requires very minimal brain activity. Build a puzzle, play shoots or ladders, play, life, whatever. A very easy, simple board game. You can play like, if you have young kids, like my son loves the matching games where you flip over the cards. Pick an activity for tonight that requires very, very minimal thinking. That way you can have a conversation during it, and not be distracted by whatever the project is or the thing is that you guys are actively doing. But you want to do something that slows them down. That's when you say, hey, I wanted to talk to you about something. But sitting down, it gives you, with that thing, it gives you opportunity to explain to them like, hey, this is how we've been. I want things to change. Here's what we're going to try to start doing, and explain to them. I'm not perfect. I mess up. Sometimes I do yell. Come up with maybe a phrase that your kid can say, like if they're getting a little whatever because you're kind of losing your a phrase that's not going to make you angry, that's not going to make, it's just going to make you remember like, pause and think. So keep it simple. I mean, like that's also very important when you do have the conversation. Keep it very, very simple, but keep it real. Don't be afraid to admit your shortcomings, your faults, your areas of weakness. And then I think the last thing is don't expect perfection, especially overnight, especially just after having one conversation. But turn it into a learning process for both of you and turn it into a game where you're both trying to help each other become better. As I said, Tanner's not perfect. The kid can be an absolute butthead sometimes, but we found a system that works for us, and I think it can work for you. You see, that moment that he was crying over the electronics, I could have stuck to my guns. I could have kept him all grounded all day to teach him a lesson, just like my dad would have. But instead, we talked, we connected, and you know what? He learned the lesson in an hour instead of suffering all day and not learning anything from it other than thinking that your parent doesn't like you or something. And, a couple days later, out of the blue, Tanner picked up the living room. Your kids do not need a drill sergeant. They need someone that is not a drill sergeant, but they need someone who remembers that they're trying their best with a brain that is still growing and still learning. Someone who can admit when they're wrong and teach them how to fix things when you make a mistake. And they need someone who chooses connection over control. And so try the puzzle technique tonight. Then come back here, leave a comment, and let me know how it went with your kid. Let me know what they said. Let me know what you said. Because I bet, as I said, it'll just surprise you if you actually take the time to do it. And so I'm just kind of curious, what's one thing that you're going to try to do differently after watching this video? Was there anything that stood out to you that you think, I'm going to try that. I'm going to try. Let me know. All right. Until next time, thank you guys so much for watching. Appreciate it. Oh, also, by the way, if you did enjoy this video, then you should definitely check out this video because YouTube thinks that you will love it based on their algorithm. They're better at picking the next video for you than I am. So check it out right here. All right. Until the next one. Peace out, everybody. Thank you for watching. Love your faces. Until next time. Peace out, everybody. Later, nerds.